Your son is gone. So stop acting like this is still your home, and learn to leave with dignity." My daughter-in-law said those words while sliding a bowl of mashed potatoes across the funeral dinner table as if she were asking someone to pass the salt. No one looked at me after that. Not my grandson in his little black tie. Not my brother-in-law staring into his coffee. Not even Daniel's best friend, who had spent the entire funeral crying harder than anyone else in the church. I just sat there in silence, my hands folded neatly in my lap beneath the tablecloth. The dining room smelled like cold roast beef, lilies from the funeral home, and the faint cedar scent of my late son's cologne still lingering in the hallway. Outside, freezing rain tapped softly against the windows of the large suburban house Daniel had bought 5 years earlier. A house he once told me would always have a room for me. "I'm glad to have you here," I whispered quietly to the audience listening to my story now. "Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from." My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, adjusted the sleeve of her black cashmere dress and took a slow sip of wine. Her makeup was flawless. Her voice steady. Too steady for a widow burying her husband only hours earlier. "We all need to move forward," she continued calmly. "Daniel wouldn't want unnecessary drama." Drama. The word echoed in my chest harder than the church bells had that afternoon. My son used to call me every Sunday morning without fail. Even after he became successful. Even after Vanessa slowly started controlling every holiday, every family dinner, every decision made inside this house. "Mom," he once told me while fixing the porch light himself, "this place is your home too." Always. I believed him. That was why I noticed something strange that night. The framed family photo near the fireplace was gone. So was the brass key Daniel always kept hanging beside the kitchen pantry. And when Vanessa stood to clear the plates, I caught her quickly slipping a folder marked property documents into a locked drawer I had never seen before. That was the moment a cold feeling settled deep in my stomach. Something was very wrong inside my son's house. I barely slept that night. The guest room at the end of the hallway felt colder than I remembered. Daniel used to keep extra blankets inside the cedar chest near the window because he knew I was always cold after sunset. But when I opened it, the blankets were gone. Only empty space remained. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed, still wearing the same black dress from the funeral. My feet ached. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but I couldn't cry anymore. It felt as though my grief had frozen somewhere deep inside me. Around midnight, I heard soft footsteps downstairs. Then whispers. Vanessa's voice. "She can't stay here long," she muttered. Another voice answered too quietly for me to recognize. I slowly walked toward the staircase, careful not to make noise. The house was dark except for the soft yellow light above the kitchen stove. I could see Vanessa standing near the counter with a stack of papers in front of her. Property tax records. Mortgage documents. My stomach tightened. Daniel had always been careful with money. Ever since he bought this house outside Denver, he handled every payment himself. He used to joke that paperwork relaxed him more than fishing did. "Mom," he once told me while helping me plant roses in the backyard, "nobody's ever going to push you around as long as I'm here." The memory hit me so hard I had to grip the hallway wall for support. But Daniel was gone now. And suddenly, nothing inside this house felt familiar anymore. The next morning, the funeral flowers were already gone from the dining room table. Vanessa had replaced them with white candles and a large decorative bowl like the funeral had never happened at all. She moved through the kitchen calmly, wearing cream-colored loungewear instead of black. "You should start thinking about where you'll go next," she said while pouring herself coffee. "This house has a lot of expenses." I nodded quietly and stared down at my untouched toast. Then I noticed something else. Daniel's office door was locked. That door had never been locked before. Not once in 5 years. And when I asked Vanessa where his spare keys were, she looked at me. For 2 seconds too long before answering. "I have everything under control." That was the moment I realized she was hiding far more than grief. For the next 3 days, the house stopped feeling like my son's home. It felt like a place preparing to erase him. Vanessa moved through every room with quiet efficiency, making phone calls, signing papers, opening drawers that Daniel had always kept private. Every morning, I heard the sound of cabinets closing and folders sliding across the kitchen counter before sunrise. And every time I walked into the room, the conversations ended. One afternoon, I noticed two men in dark jackets measuring the living room walls. "Who are they?" I asked softly. Vanessa barely looked up from her phone. "Real estate consultants." The words settled heavily in my chest. Daniel had only been buried 4 days earlier. The framed photographs began disappearing one by one after that. First the picture from his college graduation. Then the fishing photo from our trip to Montana. Even the old family portrait that used to hang beside the fireplace vanished overnight. It was as if Vanessa wanted the house to stop remembering him. I tried staying out of her way. I folded my clothes carefully, washed my own dishes, kept my grief quiet. But the silence inside that house kept growing colder. One evening, I went into the garage looking for Daniel's toolbox. He always kept spare batteries and flashlights there because Colorado winters could knock the power out without warning. That was when I noticed it. Several cardboard boxes stacked near the back wall. My name was written across the top in black marker. Margaret, storage. I stood there staring at the boxes for several seconds. Inside them were my sweaters, framed photographs, old books, even the ceramic angel Daniel bought me after his first big promotion. Someone had already started packing my life away. My hands trembled as I picked up one of the picture frames. It was a photo of Daniel at 16, smiling beside the old pickup truck his father taught him to drive. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel unwanted here, Mom," he told me the day he bought this house. I could still hear his voice so clearly. That night, while Vanessa showered upstairs, I quietly walked past Daniel's locked office again. And this time, I noticed a thin strip of light beneath the door. Someone was inside. Then I heard a man's voice say quietly, "If she finds the trust paperwork, everything changes." I froze outside Daniel's office door. The hallway was completely silent except for the low murmur of voices behind the wood paneling. My heart beat so hard I could feel it in my throat. "If she finds the trust paperwork, everything changes." The man's voice was calm, professional. Vanessa answered immediately. "She won't find anything. Daniel never told her about any of this." I slowly stepped backward before the floorboards could creak beneath my feet. My hands felt cold and numb as I returned to the guest room. Trust paperwork. The words repeated in my mind all night long. Daniel had always handled his finances privately, but he was not secretive with me. After his father passed away 20 years earlier, my son became extremely protective of the people he loved. Especially me. When my arthritis got worse 3 winters ago, Daniel installed handrails throughout my small apartment himself. He drove over every Sunday with groceries even after his business became successful. "Family takes care of family," he always said. That was why none of this made sense. The next morning, snow covered the backyard in a thin white layer. I sat alone at the kitchen table holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Vanessa entered wearing workout clothes and expensive sneakers, her phone pressed against her ear. "Yes," she said casually. "The house should be listed within 2 weeks." My stomach tightened again. Listed. Sold. Gone. She ended the call and noticed me staring. "You really should start looking at senior apartments," she said while opening the refrigerator. "This place is too large now." I lowered my eyes quietly. Part of me still hoped grief was simply changing her. That maybe losing Daniel had hardened her temporarily. But deep down, another feeling had started growing inside me. Fear. Not fear of being alone. Fear that my son had left something behind, and Vanessa was desperately trying to hide it from me. Later that afternoon, while Vanessa left for a meeting, I walked carefully toward Daniel's office. For the first time in days, the door was unlocked. The room smelled faintly like his cologne and old leather notebooks. His desk had been partially emptied, but one drawer near the bottom remained closed. Locked. Then I noticed something tucked beneath the desk. A small yellow envelope. And written across the front in Daniel's handwriting were 4 words that made my breath stop completely. For a moment, only if needed. My hands trembled as I picked up the yellow envelope. For a moment, I simply stared at Daniel's handwriting. For a moment, only if needed. My son had terrible handwriting as a child. I used to joke that his grocery lists looked like doctor prescriptions. Even after college, he still pressed too hard with his pen, leaving deep marks on every page. I carefully closed the office door behind me before opening the envelope. Inside was a folded letter and a small silver key taped to the back. The first sentence made my chest tighten immediately. "Mom, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong." I sat slowly in Daniel's leather chair and continued reading. He explained that during the past year, he had begun separating some of his financial assets from the house accounts Vanessa could access. He never wrote that he distrusted her directly, but between the lines, I could feel his concern. Especially in one sentence I read 3 times. "Please don't let anyone pressure you into leaving before speaking to Mr. Bennett." Mr. Bennett. I recognized the name instantly. Thomas Bennett had been Daniel's attorney since his business first became successful. He handled contracts, taxes, property purchases, everything important. At the bottom of the letter, Daniel had written a phone number by hand. My eyes filled with tears for the first time since the funeral. Not loud tears. Just quiet ones sliding down my face while the house remained completely silent around me. Even now, my son was still trying to protect me. Suddenly, I heard the garage door opening downstairs. Vanessa was home. I quickly folded the letter and slipped the envelope inside my sweater just seconds before her heels clicked across the kitchen floor. "Margaret," she called out sharply. I wiped my face and stepped into the hallway. For one brief second, her eyes moved toward Daniel's office behind me. Then toward my hands. "You shouldn't be in there," she said calmly. I forced a small nod. I was only looking for old photographs. She studied my face carefully, almost like she was searching for something. Then her expression softened into a smile that somehow felt colder than anger. "Well," she said quietly, "there are going to be many changes around here soon." That night, after everyone went to sleep, I locked the guest room door and dialed the number Daniel had left for me. The man who answered listened silently while I introduced myself. Then he said 7 words that changed everything. "Mrs. Parker, your son prepared for this." I didn't sleep after that phone call. I sat awake in the dark guest room clutching Daniel's letter while the snow continued falling outside the windows. Every part of me felt exhausted, but my mind would not rest. "Your son prepared for this." Mr. Bennett's voice kept replaying in my head. Before ending the call, he asked me to meet him privately the next morning at his office downtown. He insisted I come alone. "Do not discuss this with Vanessa yet," he said carefully. "It's important." The next morning, I told Vanessa I was going to church. She barely looked up from her tablet. "Fine," she replied. "Just don't be gone too long. I have movers coming this afternoon." Movers. The word hit me harder than I expected. I quietly put on my old wool coat and left the house without another question. Downtown Denver looked gray beneath the winter clouds. The sidewalks were wet from melted snow, and people hurried past carrying coffee cups and briefcases while I clutched my purse tightly against my chest. Mr. Bennett's office sat on the 14th floor of a glass building Daniel once proudly showed me after signing his first major business contract. He made me feel important that day, I whispered softly to myself while riding the elevator upward. When the office doors opened, Thomas Bennett greeted me immediately. He looked tired. Older than I remembered. And strangely nervous. "Mrs. Parker," he said gently, guiding me into his office. "Your son loved you very much." That sentence alone nearly broke me. I lowered myself into the chair across from his desk while he opened a thick black folder filled with documents. Trust agreements. Property records. Bank statements. Then he slid one document carefully toward me. The title read, The Daniel Parker Family Trust. My hand started trembling again. Daniel created this trust 11 months ago, Mr. Bennett explained quietly. After updating several concerns regarding his marital assets. I stared at him silently. He transferred ownership of the house, the attorney continued, along with several investment accounts, into protected holdings. I could barely breathe. Then he looked directly at me and said the words Vanessa never expected anyone to hear. You, Mrs. Parker, are the primary beneficiary. The room went completely silent. Outside the office windows, snow drifted slowly over the city. And for the first time since my son's funeral, I realized something important. Vanessa had not been trying to protect Daniel's estate. She had been trying to keep me from discovering. I stared down at the trust documents for what felt like several minutes. My name appeared again and again across the pages. Margaret Parker, primary beneficiary. The house. Daniel's investment accounts. Even a portion of his business shares. I looked up at Mr. Bennett in complete disbelief. There has to be some mistake, I whispered. The attorney slowly shook his head. No mistake, he said gently. Your son updated everything personally. I pressed my trembling hands together in my lap, trying to steady myself. Daniel had never spoken to me about any of this. Not once. And suddenly I understood why Vanessa had been rushing to remove photographs, pack my belongings, and push me out of the house before I had time to think clearly. She thought I knew nothing. Mr. Bennett carefully removed another document from the folder. Your son also added protective clauses, he explained. If anyone attempted to pressure you into surrendering your residency rights or financial interests immediately after his death, several transfers would automatically freeze. That explained the panic I had overheard outside Daniel's office. The attorney leaned back quietly before speaking again. Daniel became concerned during the last year of his marriage. I lowered my eyes. Even hearing those words hurt. My son had loved deeply. Sometimes too deeply. He believed patience could fix almost anything. But I remembered the small changes after Vanessa entered his life. Fewer phone calls. Shorter holiday visits. The way he often looked exhausted at family dinners while insisting everything was fine. Still, every Sunday morning, he called me. Without fail. Morning, Mom, he would say warmly. Did you take your blood pressure medicine? Even at 42 years old, he still worried about me like that. A tear slid quietly down my cheek. Mr. Bennett handed me a tissue before continuing carefully. There's something else you should know. He explained that Daniel had moved a significant amount of money into protected accounts only 3 months before the accident. And Vanessa had no direct access to them. I suddenly remembered the late-night whispers outside the office door. If she finds the trust paperwork, everything changes. My stomach tightened. This was never just about grief. Vanessa had already been planning something before the funeral ended. Before leaving, Mr. Bennett placed the silver key from Daniel's envelope onto the desk between us. Your son instructed me to tell you this only if necessary, he said quietly. I stared at the key. What does it open? The attorney hesitated for a moment. Then he answered softly. A private safety deposit box your son kept hidden from everyone, including his wife. I held the silver key tightly in my palm during the entire ride home. It looked ordinary. Small. Plain. But somehow, it felt heavier than anything I had carried since Daniel's funeral. Snow continued falling across the neighborhood as the taxi pulled into the driveway. The house stood quiet beneath the gray afternoon sky, its windows glowing softly from inside. For years, that house had felt warm to me. Now it felt like a place filled with locked doors and hidden conversations. The moment I stepped inside, I sensed tension immediately. Vanessa stood near the kitchen island speaking sharply into her phone. "I don't care what froze," she whispered angrily. "Figure it out." The second she noticed me, her expression changed instantly. Calm again. Controlled. "You were gone a long time," she said. "I stopped by church," I answered softly. She stared at me for a moment too long before nodding. Then her eyes moved toward my purse. I suddenly understood something important. She was watching me now. Carefully. That evening, movers arrived carrying stacks of empty boxes through the front hallway. They spoke quietly while measuring furniture and placing labels on cabinets. One of them accidentally opened the door to Daniel's office. Vanessa reacted immediately. "Not that room," she snapped. The sharpness in her voice startled everyone, including me. The mover apologized and closed the door quickly, but I noticed something strange before it shut completely. Daniel's desk drawers were gone. Removed entirely. Later that night, I sat alone in the guest room staring at the silver key while the television murmured faintly downstairs. My mind kept returning to one question. What could Daniel possibly have hidden badly enough to keep secret from his own wife? Around midnight, I quietly stepped into the hallway for water. That was when I heard Vanessa again. This time she wasn't whispering. "She met with someone," she said angrily over the phone. "I know she did." Silence followed. Then her voice dropped lower. "If Margaret gets access to that box before I do, everything falls apart." My breath caught instantly. The box. The safety deposit box. She knew about it. I carefully backed away before she could hear me and returned to the guest room, locking the door behind me. For the first time since Daniel died, my grief was no longer the strongest feeling inside me. Now there was something else growing quietly beneath it. Suspicion. And deep in my heart, I realized my son had not simply prepared documents before his death. He had prepared for a battle. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was completely silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Snow covered the backyard in a smooth white blanket, untouched and cold beneath the pale Colorado sky. I sat on the edge of the bed holding Daniel's silver key in both hands. My son had hidden something important enough to protect even from his own wife. And somehow, he knew I would eventually need to find it. Around 8 o'clock, Vanessa knocked lightly on the guest room door. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice sounded calm again. Too calm. When I stepped into the kitchen, I noticed the dining table had been cleared completely. The funeral cards, flowers, and framed photos were all gone now. Only a stack of paperwork remained. Vanessa motioned toward a chair. "I've been reviewing finances," she explained smoothly. "This house is expensive to maintain after Daniel's passing." I sat quietly while she slid several documents toward me. Apartment brochures. Senior living communities. One brochure showed smiling elderly couples beside a swimming pool. "You'd probably be happier somewhere smaller," she continued. "Less stressful." Stressful. I almost wanted to laugh at the word. Instead, I folded my hands calmly in my lap exactly the way my mother taught me decades ago. Then Vanessa said the sentence that finally removed every remaining doubt from my heart. "I'll need you moved out by the end of next week." Not maybe. Not eventually. She had already decided. I looked down at the brochures without answering. And that seemed to irritate her more than anger would have. "You can't stay here forever, Margaret." Forever. The same house Daniel once told me would always be my home. Before I could respond, her phone suddenly rang across the kitchen counter. The moment she answered, her expression changed. "What do you mean the transfer was denied?" she snapped quietly. Silence. Then she turned and walked toward the hallway, lowering her voice. I only caught fragments. "Frozen accounts, who authorized this? No, she doesn't know yet." My heart started beating faster. Daniel's protections were already activating. Vanessa returned several minutes later, visibly shaken. For the first time since the funeral. But she still forced a smile. "Anyway," she said tightly, "we should make your transition peaceful." Peaceful. That word stayed with me all afternoon. Because suddenly, I realized something chilling. Vanessa wasn't asking me to leave anymore. She was desperate for me to leave before I discovered the rest of Daniel's secrets. And later that evening, while searching through my purse for tissues, I noticed something folded inside Daniel's envelope that I had somehow missed before. A tiny bank receipt. Attached to a private vault number. I barely touched dinner that night. Vanessa moved around the kitchen pretending everything was normal while the movers continued carrying boxes through the house. Every few minutes, I heard tape ripping, furniture sliding, doors opening and closing. My life was being packed away room by room. And somehow, Vanessa still smiled through all of it. I sat quietly at the table turning the small bank receipt over in my hands beneath the cloth napkin so no one could see it. Private Vault 2147. The receipt listed a downtown branch only 6 blocks from Mr. Bennett's office. Daniel had hidden it carefully inside the envelope for a reason. The next morning, I waited until Vanessa left for what she called a financial meeting. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I put on my coat and called a taxi. The bank lobby was warm and silent when I arrived. Marble floors. Soft piano music. The kind of place Daniel always felt comfortable in once his business became successful. I never did. A young employee greeted me politely at the front desk, but the moment I handed over the silver key and receipt, her expression changed. "One moment, Mrs. Parker." She disappeared through a hallway and returned with the branch manager only minutes later. "Please come with me," the manager said gently. My hands shook as he led me into a private viewing room downstairs. The walls were quiet and windowless, the air cool enough to make me pull my coat tighter around my shoulders. Then he placed a small metal box on the table in front of me. Vault 2147. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. My son had touched this box. Planned this. Prepared this. Slowly, I inserted the silver key into the lock. Inside were several sealed envelopes, property records, copies of financial accounts, and a flash drive labeled only with one word. Vanessa. A cold feeling moved through my chest. Beneath the flash drive sat one final envelope in Daniel's handwriting. "Mom, if you've opened this, trust no one until you watch the videos." Videos. My fingers suddenly felt numb. The bank manager quietly excused himself, leaving me alone in the small room while I stared at the flash drive resting in the center of the box. Outside, distant traffic echoed faintly through the building walls. But inside that room, everything felt completely still. Because deep down, I already knew something terrible was waiting for me on that drive. Something my son had been too afraid to say out loud while he was alive. I didn't open the flash drive at the bank. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly, and suddenly the small room felt difficult to breathe in. Instead, I carefully placed everything back inside the envelopes and asked the branch manager if there was somewhere private I could sit for a while. He guided me upstairs to a quiet office overlooking downtown Denver. Snow drifted slowly past the windows while I borrowed his laptop and inserted the flash drive. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a folder appeared on the screen. Video files. My chest tightened. There were 6 recordings in total, each dated over the last 8 months. I clicked the first one. And suddenly, my son appeared on the screen. Daniel looked exhausted. Older somehow. The moment I heard his voice, my eyes filled with tears. "Mom," he said quietly into the camera, "if you're watching this, things probably got worse than I hoped they would." I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop myself from crying aloud. Behind him, I recognized his office at home. The same office Vanessa had locked after the funeral. Daniel rubbed his face tiredly before continuing. "I didn't want to believe it at first," he admitted. "But Vanessa has been moving money without telling me." My stomach dropped instantly. He explained that over the past year, he discovered hidden credit lines, missing business funds, and unauthorized withdrawals connected to accounts only Vanessa could access. She kept saying it was bookkeeping mistakes, he said bitterly. But it never stopped. I stared at the screen in complete silence. This wasn't grief talking. This was fear. Real fear. Then Daniel said something that chilled me completely. If anything happens to me suddenly, do not trust anyone until you speak to Bennett. My breathing became shallow. The recording ended a few seconds later. I sat frozen in the chair while snow continued falling outside the windows. Everything Vanessa had done since the funeral suddenly looked different. The rush to sell the house. The packed boxes. The frozen transfers. The desperation. She wasn't simply trying to move on after losing her husband. She had been trying to stay ahead of something. With trembling hands, I opened the second video file. This one was shorter. Darker. Daniel looked directly into the camera for several long seconds before saying the sentence that made my blood run cold. If you're seeing this, Vanessa probably knows about the trust by now. 3 weeks later, I left the house quietly. Not because Vanessa forced me to. And not because I had nowhere else to go. I left because, for the first time since Daniel died, the house no longer felt heavy with fear. The truth had already done its work. After reviewing the videos and financial records from the safety deposit box, Mr. Bennett handled everything personally. The frozen accounts remained protected under Daniel's trust, and the house legally belonged to the estate he had placed under my care. Vanessa fought it at first. Briefly. But the recordings Daniel left behind changed everything. There would be no quick sale. No secret transfers. No disappearing money. And no removing me from the home my son had promised would always be mine. Ironically, after all her efforts to push me out, Vanessa was the one who eventually moved away. I heard she rented a luxury apartment downtown for a while before quietly selling most of her jewelry and designer bags. Several business accounts tied to Daniel's company were investigated. Afterward, I never asked for details. Some truths no longer needed my attention. As for me, I bought a small condo near the water outside Santa Monica. Nothing extravagant. Just a peaceful place with white curtains, warm sunlight, and a small balcony where I drink coffee every morning while listening to the ocean. I brought only a few things from Colorado. Daniel's favorite baseball cap. The ceramic angel he once gave me. And one framed photograph of us standing beside his old pickup truck when he was 16 years old. Sometimes I still miss him so badly it feels physical. Especially on Sunday mornings. I still wake up expecting my phone to ring and hear his familiar voice say, "Morning, Mom." Grief never really disappears. It simply becomes quieter. But one thing changed forever after everything that happened. I stopped confusing silence with weakness. That night at the funeral dinner, Vanessa looked at me like I was a burden ready to be removed from her life. An old woman with nowhere left to go. What she never understood was this: my son knew exactly who I was. He knew I would survive quietly. Patiently. With dignity. And in the end, the greatest thing Daniel left me was not the house or the trust. It was the proof that even after his death, he never stopped protecting his mother.